They say the cruelest words are the ones spoken with a smile in front of people who are too comfortable to look away. This is the story of the night my own father stood on a stage. He did not build inside a building he did not design, and told 300 people that I was worthless. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that I was the one who had drawn every line of the room they were standing in. And by the time I walked out those doors,
Here,
the whole
in
family
the heart
empire
of the Grand
was
Canyon,
already resting
the
on the
silence
foundation
speaks
only I could
volumes,
pull away.
and the light
Stay with me,
reveals
because
the
what
soul of
happened
the earth.
in the 90 seconds after he handed me the microphone changed everything. My name is Elena Witt. Or the people who actually love me have always called me now. I am 41 years old. And 3 weeks ago, at the grand opening of my family's new corporate headquarters, my father did something that made me decide to erase myself from this family for good. Picture it with me. A brand new tower of glass and one stone in the heart of Greenwich, Connecticut. The kind of building that makes people slow their cars just to look up. 300 guests in tailored suits and silk dresses. Champagne
Here,
moving through the crowd
amidst
on
the
silver
giants
trays.
of the desert,
String lights woven through the
morning
atrium.
light brings a
I had
stillness
spent
that
11
speaks.
months of my life.
They said this was the
perfecting every
perfect
beam,
place to
every
start
curve,
fresh,
every fall of light
a sanctuary
chosen by my
away
own
from the
hand.
city's
My father
chaos.
stood at the center of it, all microphone in hand, glowing under the chandeliers, introducing his family one by one to a room full of Connecticut's most important people. He praised my stepmother, he praised my stepbrother, and then he got to me. His smile, that smile I had seen 1,000 times growing up, the one that looked so warm to everyone else, but landed on me like a shard of glass. And this, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, is my daughter now. No degree, no real career, just very, very good at spending the family's money. 300 people laughed. Real laughter, the kind that comes from people who think they are on a harmless joke, never realizing they are watching cruelty dressed up as drama. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I had spent 30 years learning how not to. Instead, I stood up. I picked up my champagne glass slowly, and I felt the room shift, felt 300 pairs of eyes turn toward me, some curious, some already savoring the sight of the disappointing daughter about to fall apart in public. I raised my glass toward the man who had raised me to feel invisible, and I said in a voice that was calm and clear and loud enough for every microphone in that atrium to catch it, "This is the most beautiful building I have ever designed, and this is the last time any of you will ever see me." Then I set the glass down without drinking, and I walked toward the doors. The laughter died in the room like a candle pinched between two fingers. Somewhere behind me, a woman gasped, and what I said next once I reached that stage is the reason the entire room went silent, the reason my father's face turned the color of ash. But we will get there. First, I need you to understand how a moment like that is even possible, because a scene like that does not come from nowhere. A father does not learn to smile at his own child like that overnight. It takes years, decades, thousands of tiny moments, stacked one on top of the other, until a little girl grows up quietly believing that something inside her is simply broken. That is the part almost no one talks about. If you have ever sat at a family table and felt like a guest in your own home, if you have ever been the one they talked about in lowered voices, the one whose wins somehow never counted, then you already understand more about this story than I could ever explain. And if that is you, do me one small favor before we go on. Take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you truly want to know how this ends, because I promise you the ending is not the one my father expected. And while you are here, let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from and what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back. Back before the tower, before the company, before I ever learned that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the power. Let me take you back to a house in Connecticut, and to a little girl who was slowly, gently, almost politely erased. To understand how
Here,
a girl becomes
in the
invisible
heart of
in
the
her
Grand
own home,
Canyon,
you first
the
have to
silence speaks
understand the world
volumes,
she grew
and the
up in.
light
The
reveals
Whitmores
the
of
soul
Greenwich,
of the earth.
Connecticut. That is how we were known. Greenwich sits on what people call the Gold Coast, a stretch of old money about 50 miles. The shoreline from New York City close enough that the men caught the morning train into Manhattan, and far enough but they could pretend the city never touched them. It is a place of stone estates set back behind long gravel drives of Georgian houses that have stood for 100 years of close, so exclusive exclusive. You cannot simply pay to enter, you have to be invited, and even then someone has to vouch for your name. In a town like that, reputation is not just important, reputation is the whole religion. What people saw when they looked at you mattered more than anything that was actually true. My father, Charles Whitmore, understood the religion better than anyone. He was the chairman.
They said this was the perfect place to start fresh. A sanctuary away from the city's chaos.
Shopping centers and office parks up and down the eastern seaboard, and who built his own image just as carefully. We had the 6-bedroom colonial cars and a circular drive, the membership at the club, where the waiters knew our order before we sat down. From the outside, we looked flawless, and for a while we very nearly were. My mother made sure of that. I was only 8 when she died, and I have to be honest with you, I can barely remember her face anymore without looking at a photograph. But I remember her hands, soft, always warm, always reaching for mine across a car seat or a dinner table. I remember that when she was alive, I was somebody's daughter, and then very quickly I was not. Cancer took her fast in a single brutal winter. 2 years later, my father married. Her name was Vivian, and she arrived with a son from her first marriage, a boy named Preston, 3 years older than me. Within a single year, they were not just part of our family. They had become the family, and I, without anyone ever raising their voice, without a single dramatic scene, quietly became furniture. I need you to understand that it was never the kind of cruelty you see in fairy tales. There was no wicked stepmother making me scrub floors, no locked doors, no shouting. It was so much softer than that, and somehow so much worse. Preston got praised for grades that were never as good as mine. Preston got a new car at 16, and I got his old one when he was done with it. Preston was spoken about as the future of the company, and I was simply somehow also in the room. There was a name for what I was, though I would not learn it until I was much older, sitting in a therapist's office decades later. In families like mine, there is often a golden child, and there is a scapegoat. The golden child carries the parents' proudly shining proof that the family is special, and the scapegoat quietly carries everything the family does not want to look at. Preston was the goal, I was the shadow, and here's the part that took me 30 years to understand the part I think some of you listening right now need to hear tonight. The deepest wound was never any single thing that was said to me. It was the thousands of tiny moments, the look, a sigh, a turn back, a birthday, half remembered stacked up one on top of another, until I simply believed, all the way down to my bones, that there was something fundamentally wrong with me. The belief was planted so early, so gently, that by the time I was old enough to question it no longer felt like an opinion. It felt like a fact, like gravity, just the plain truth of who I was. But there was one person who never got that memo. One person who looked straight through the family story and saw the actual girl underneath it. My grandmother, my mother's mother, Rosemary. Every Sunday evening, without fail, the phone would ring. And it would be her wanting to know about my week, my sketches, my little dreams, the things no one else in that house ever bothered to ask about. She would listen, really listen, in a way that made me feel for a few minutes at a time
in the
like
heart
I was
of
a
the Grand
person
Canyon,
and not
the
a
silence
problem.
speaks
And she
volumes,
used to say something
and the
to me
light
that I
reveals
carried like
the
a
soul
smooth
of the
stone in
earth.
my pocket for the rest of my life. She would say, "You remind me of myself at your age now. Underestimated, overlooked, but I see you. I've always seen you." I did not know it then, but my grandmother was quietly watching everything that was happening to me. And long before she died, she made a decision, and she set something aside for me, something no one else in that family ever knew existed. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and that part of the story deserves its own moment. Let me step out for just a second and speak to you directly, because I know some of you understand exactly what I'm describing. That specific loneliness
Here,
of being invisible
amidst the giants of the
inside
desert,
your own family.
the
Sitting
morning
at a
light
holiday
brings a
table
stillness
surrounded by
that
the
speaks.
people who are supposed to love you
They
most,
said
and
this was the
feeling
perfect
like a
place to
stranger
start
who wandered
fresh.
in from the cold.
A
If that
sanctuary
is you, I
away
want
from
you
the
to hear me
city's chaos.
clearly. You are not imagining it, and you are absolutely not alone in it. Stay with me, because the invisible girl in this story does not stay invisible, not even close. What she learned to do in the silence of that house would one day become the most powerful weapon she ever owned. The day my whole future was quietly decided for me, I was 20 years old. I was in my second year at a design school in Rhode Island, studying architecture and interior design, and I was good at it. Not just good, I was near the top of my class, carrying grades I had earned entirely on my own. And sitting on my desk was a scholarship application for a summer program in Copenhagen, a chance to study Scandinavian design at its source, the kind of opportunity that could shape an entire career. For the first time in my life, I could see a door opening, and on the other side of it, a version of me I actually wanted to become. And then my father called me home. A family meeting, he said. In our house, those two words had never once meant anything good. I found him in his study, the room with a mahogany desk, and the walls lined with the words for buildings other people had actually designed for him. My father did not look up from his papers when he started talking. Vivian stood beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder, the picture of the United Front. Now he began, we need to make some sacrifices as a family right now. I already knew. Some part of me had known before I even walked into the room. Preston had been accepted into a prestigious graduate business program. He explained an incredible opportunity when the family simply could not pass up. And the money, well, the money would not stretch to cover both his program and my tuition. So they had decided that I would step away from school. Just for now, just until things settled. Vivian's voice slid in and sweet as honey and twice as cold. A girl doesn't really need an expensive degree to have a good life now. You're lovely. You'll meet someone wonderful. That's what actually matters in the end. I sat there perfectly still, not because I was shocked. I'd spent 12 years learning never to let them see me shocked, but because some small, stubborn, foolish part of me would still lead and then hoped for something different. You promised, I finally said, and I heard my own voice come out quieter than I wanted. You promised Mom before she died that you would take care of my education. My father's jaw tightened just slightly. Circumstances change now. When things stabilize, I'll make it up to you. He never did, and here is the detail that would take me years to uncover a truth that slipped out much later at a cousin's wedding after too much wine and too little caution. There had been plenty of money. There was always plenty of money. They had simply decided quite deliberately that I was not worth spending it on. I did not argue that day. I did not slam a single door. I just nodded and I went upstairs,
in the heart
and
of the
somewhere
Grand
in the
Canyon,
silence of that
the
childhood
silence
bedroom
speaks
I made myself a
volumes,
promise
and the light
instead.
reveals the
This would be the
soul of the
last
earth.
time I ever let another human being decide what I was worth. A few weeks later, I packed one suitcase and left Connecticut with a little under $3,000 to my name. And I moved to Boston because it was close enough to feel possible and far enough to feel like freedom. Now, if you have never tried to build a life in Boston with almost nothing, let me paint you the truth of it. Boston is one of the most expensive cities in the entire country. My first apartment was a tiny studio in a neighborhood called Allston, perched right above a laundromat, the kind of place where you can hear every footstep from the unit next door. The rent
Here,
swallowed nearly
amidst
everything
the giants
I
of
made.
the desert,
In December and January,
the morning
heating
light
bills were
brings
so
a
brutal.
stillness that
I used
speaks.
to sleep in my coat.
They said
listening
this
to
was the
old
perfect
radiator
place to
clank
start
and hiss
fresh.
through the night like something
A
alive
sanctuary
and
away
unhappy.
from the city's
I poured
chaos.
coffee at a cafe every single morning before the sun came up, and in the afternoons I worked as an assistant at a small design studio for barely more than minimum wage. But that studio is where everything quietly began to turn. The man who owned it was named Arthur, an older architect with paint under his fingernails and 40 years of hard-won taste. And Arthur saw something in me that my own family never had. "You've got a real eye, Nell," he told me one afternoon watching me with raw floor plan I had not been asked to touch. "Don't waste it." So I did not waste it. I stayed late long after the others had gone home. I learned every program, every technique, every trick of light and space and proportion. At night when I should have been sleeping, I took free open courses from design schools online, teaching myself the software, the business, the history, everything a degree would have handed me. I clawed together one hard evening at a time. My classroom was a second-hand laptop and a cheap desk lamp. And slowly, so slowly, I almost did not notice it happening. The broken girl from Greenwich was becoming someone new. Someone nobody up in Connecticut would have recognized. Let me pause here again, because I think this is the part where some of you might be feeling something tighten in your chest. Maybe you walked away from your own family. Maybe you are the one they still whisper about at holidays. And maybe some quiet voice has told you that walking away made you strange or cold or broken. So I want to give you a number. Researchers at Cornell University ran one of the first large national studies on this, and they found that 27% of American adults have cut off contact with a family member. 27%. That is roughly 68 million people in this country alone, quietly carrying the same wound you are. One of the researchers called it a problem hiding in plain sight. So if you have ever felt like the only one, please hear me. You are standing in an enormous and invisible crowd of people who understand exactly. And what I did not yet know back in that freezing little apartment above the laundromat was that the design work I was teaching myself by lamplight would one day lead me straight back to the family. They threw me away, through a door none of them ever saw coming. The door came though not in any way I could have predicted, and it came wrapped in grief. My grandmother Rosemary died when I was 32 years old. I drove down to Connecticut for the funeral and sat in a very back row watching my father deliver a eulogy about a remarkable woman who had devoted her whole life to family. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it in the back of my throat. I kept to myself, spoke to no one, and drove back to Boston that same night. But 3 days later, my phone rang, and it was a lawyer. I had never heard of a woman named Eleanor Cross calling from a firm that specialized in private estates. She told me that my grandmother had established a trust in my name 8 years
in the
earlier,
heart of the
with
Grand
one very
Canyon,
specific
the silence
instruction
speaks volumes,
attached
and the
to
light
it.
reveals
No other
the
member
soul
of the
of
family
the earth.
was ever to be told it existed. And then she told me the number. The trust held just over $800,000. I actually had to sit down on the floor of my apartment. And then the lawyer said there was a letter written in my grandmother's own hand, and asked if I would like her to read it aloud. I said yes, though my voice did not sound like my own. My dearest girl, she read, I know what they did to you. I know about the school, about the promises, about all of it. I fought with your father until I had no words left, and he would not listen. He never does. This money is yours. No strings, no conditions,
Here,
no
amidst the
explanations.
giants
to
of the
anyone.
desert,
Use it to build the life that
the
tried
morning
to take
light
from
brings
you.
a
And remember
stillness
what I
that
always
speaks.
told you. Do not ever
They
let
said this
anyone
was the
tell you
perfect
that you are
place
not
to
worthy,
start fresh.
because when they finally
A sanctuary
see your worth,
away
and
from
they
the
will,
city's
it will
chaos.
already be too late for them. I sat on that floor and wept for a woman who had protected me from beyond the grave, and then I dried my face and I got to work. I took part of that money and I poured it into the small design practice. I had already started building in the quietest studio I had named Hearthstone. Now, here is where the story turns into something I could never have written on purpose. Hearthstone's studio grew, and it grew fast, but I built it in a very particular way. I kept my own name off of everything public. No profiles, no press, no photographs. Every contract went through the company and through my attorney. All anyone in the industry ever saw was the work, and the work was extraordinary if I am allowed to say so. We designed headquarters, hotels, flagship spaces for people with more money than they knew what to do with. And because I had learned as a little girl that silence was the only language my family respected, I let Hearthstone become known while I stayed invisible. Why this secrecy? Because I knew my family. I knew that the moment they discovered I was succeeding, they would find a way to either take the credit or tear it down. So I said nothing, and I let the reputation grow in the dark. And then about a year and a half ago, a contract landed on my desk that stopped my heart cold. Whitmore Properties, my father's company, wanted to hire Hearthstone Studio to design their brand new corporate headquarters, the crown jewel of his entire career. The tower he intended as his final monument. The single largest project of our year, offered to me by the man who had told me I would never amount to anything. I want you to sit with the strangeness of that for a moment. For 11 months I designed the most important building of my father's life, and he had absolutely no idea. Every meeting ran through my team. Every decision was signed off by my project director. And more than once at industry dinners and ribbon cuttings, I heard through colleagues that Charles Whitmore had been singing the praises of, and I am quoting him now, the genius behind Hearthstone. My father stood in rooms full of powerful people and bragged about the brilliance of the daughter he had thrown away, and he never once knew who was doing it. Then the invitation arrived. Heady cream paper, gold embossed lettering. Charles Whitmore requests the pleasure of your company at the grand opening of the new Whitmore headquarters. An invitation to the unveiling of my own building. I almost threw it in the trash. Almost. But then I thought about my grandmother, about her letter, about 12 years of silence, and every promise ever broken. And I made a decision. I said yes, not because I wanted reconciliation, not because I believed even for a second that anything had changed. I said yes because somewhere deep down I knew with a cold and total certainty that my father would do something unforgivable that night. And when he did, I wanted to be standing right there so I could say goodbye
Here,
entirely
in the
on
heart
my
of the
own
Grand
terms.
Canyon, the
And so we
silence
arrived
speaks
back where the
volumes,
story began.
and the light
that
reveals
glittering
the soul
atrium,
of
the
the
stringed
earth.
lights woven through the beams. I had designed the 300 guests in their silk and their tailor. Gideon found me near the entrance and looked me up and down with that same practiced smile, murmuring that my father had not been sure I would have anything appropriate to wear. Preston swept past without so much as a glance, telling someone about his vision for the company's future. And all around me, I could feel the little currents of pity my father had clearly seeded in advance. 2 gentle questions, the sympathetic tilt of the head, the relatives, who had plainly been told that poor Nell was still after all these years just figuring things out.
Here,
I said nothing.
amidst the giants
waited,
of the desert,
and then the lights dimmed,
the morning light brings a stillness that speaks.
My father climbed the steps.
They
to
said
warm
this was the
applause
perfect place to start
family
fresh,
one by one.
a
He
sanctuary
praised his wife,
away from
he
the
praised
city's
his
chaos.
stepson, and then he got to me, and he smiled that smile, and he told 300 people that his daughter had no degree, no career, and was very good at spending the family's money. And they laughed, so I stood. I raised my glass, and this time I told them the truth. That the beautiful building they were all standing inside, every beam and every line of it was mine. That Hearthstone studio, the genius he had been praising for a year, was me. And then into a silence so complete you could hear the ice settle in the glass as I set my champagne down and I walked out. I drove back to Boston that night feeling lighter than I had in years. But I knew even then that it was far from over. Families like mine do not simply let go. They rewrite the story instead. And within a day the rewriting began. My phone started filling with messages, not from my father. He was far too proud for that, but from cousins and aunts and old family friends, all of them suddenly deeply concerned about my emotional state. Nell, we heard about the opening. Your father says you've been struggling. Nell, sweetheart, are you getting help? The narrative was already being built brick by brick. Poor unstable Nell, who had some kind of breakdown at her father's big night. Charles Whitmore, the patient and loving father, doing his best with a troubled daughter. I did not answer a single one of them. I simply waited because I knew what was coming next. And I did not have to wait long. 3 days later, my assistant told me that a family was in the lobby insisting on seeing me, so they had driven all the way to Boston. I had them shown into our main conference room, the one with glass walls, and a view of the harbor, and I let them wait a few minutes before I walked in. My father looked older than I had ever seen him, gray and somehow smaller, because in the days since the gala, the truth had finally reached him. If Hearthstone walked away from the headquarters project, if I pulled my team and my name and my work, the building would stall, the lease deals would collapse, and the crown jewel of his career would become the most public failure of his life. He had come to beg, though a man like that does not know how to beg, so instead he tried to bargain, and then to threaten. I let him finish, and then I told him very calmly, without a single drop of cruelty in my voice, that I was not doing this for revenge. I was doing it because I was finally setting a boundary. You spent my whole childhood telling me I was worthless, I said. You do not get to depend on my work and insult me in the same breath. Not anymore. And then I asked them to leave, but the deepest wound of all did not come from them. It came a week later from my mother's younger brother, my Uncle Daniel, a gentleman I had barely spoken to in 20 years. He called me, his voice shaking, and he told me he had carried a secret for far too long. When my father claimed there was no money for my education, he had been lying, because my mother, before she died, had set aside a fund of her own money meant specifically and only for my schooling enough to carry me through any university in the country.
In the heart
and my
of the
father
Grand
had
Canyon,
drained it.
the
He had
silence
used my
speaks
dead mother's
volumes,
gift to pay for
and the light
Preston's
reveals
degree,
the soul
and then he
of
had
the
looked
earth.
me in the eye and told me the money did not exist. My grandmother Rosemary had discovered it, and that Daniel told me through tears was the real reason she built the trust. She could not undo what my father had stolen, but she could make absolutely certain he never took anything from me again. I could have let the knowledge turn me to stone. For a while, honestly, it nearly did. But instead I did something that surprised even me. I found a therapist, a good one, and I sat in her quiet office, not because I was falling apart, but because I was finally, after all these years, ready to put myself back together. It was there in that room that
Here,
I learned the words
amidst
for what
the
I had
giants
lived.
of the
That in
desert,
families like mine, there is
the
a role
morning
called
light
the
brings a
scapegoat, the
stillness
child
that
chosen to
speaks.
carry everything the family
They said
does
this
not
was the
want to
perfect
face.
place to start
and here's
fresh,
the truth that set
a
me free, the
sanctuary
truth
away
I want
from
to
the
hand
city's
to you
chaos.
tonight if you need it. The verdict was never evidence. I had been cast in a role, not convicted of a crime. That belief I had carried since I was a little girl, that certainty that something was fundamentally broken inside me was never real. It was a costume sewn onto me by people who needed someone to wear it. And the moment I understood that I felt something I had not felt in 3 decades, I felt whole. My life bloomed after that, quietly and steadily. The studio thrived. I reconnected with my Uncle Daniel, and we have dinner once a month now. He tells me stories about my mother. The real ones, the ones about how fierce and stubborn and the light she was. And once a season I drive out to my grandmother's grave, and I sit with her a while, and I tell her that she was right. So let me leave you with what all of this finally taught me. Your worth is not decided by a diploma, It is not decided by the opinion of the people who share your last name. It is not decided by who chooses to believe in you or who chooses to count you out. Your worth is decided by what you build. And absolutely no one is watching by who you become when the whole world has written you off. Walking away from my family was never about revenge, and I need you to understand that difference. A boundary is not a weapon. A boundary is a shelter. It is you standing in a doorway and saying, "This is where my life begins, and this is where your damage ends." I do not hate my father. Hate takes too much energy, and I have a life I would rather spend it on. I simply do not need him anymore, and that, it turns out, is the one thing he never taught me, and the one thing I had to learn entirely on my own. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of the story. It was not an easy one to tell, and knowing that you were here listening means more than I can put into words. If any part of this reached something inside you tonight, I would love to hear from you, so please leave a comment and tell me your own story, or simply let me know you were here. And if the story moved you, take a moment to like it and to subscribe to the channel True Stories, the Tragedies and Comedies of Life, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell here week after week. Before you go, I want to say one last thing, and I want you to really hear it. You are not what they said you were. You never ever were. You are so much more than the smallest room they ever tried to keep you in. Until next time, this is Nell, and for the first time in my life, I am finally completely free.